We now move to questions to the Minister for Justice, and I call Patsy McGlone.
Agus buíchas. Ceist ever here.
Minister.
My officials and I have regular discussions with our colleagues in the UK and Irish governments on matters relating to ending the harm caused by paramilitarism. The Independent Reporting Commission has an important role in reporting on progress towards this objective, and I welcome their positive feedback on the work of the Executive Programme for Paramilitarism and Organised Crime, for which I am the lead minister. I welcome too the progress that is being made against the new recommendations that were made in the Independent Reporting Commission's most recent report published last December, particularly the inclusion of a continued executive-wide commitment to tackling paramilitarism in the draft programme for government. The Independent Reporting Commission's previously recommended that Northern Ireland should have specific organised crime legislation like that used in other jurisdictions. I am intending to create 2 new offences in the new Justice Bill, which is currently before the Assembly. One of participating in the criminal activities of an organised crime group, and another of directing the criminal activities of an organised crime group. The draft clauses have been shared with the Justice Committee and will be formally added to the bill at amendment stage. I look forward to the publishing of the Independent Reporting Commission's 7th report in the coming months.
Mr McGlone.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, there has been some speculation that a person is to be appointed to engage with these illegal groups. Can you confirm or deny that? Because obviously there are those of us who would be concerned that at this time, given a lot of years have passed since the Good Friday Agreement, that there would be a risk there in legitimising illegal paramilitary groups rather than rectifying those who are engaged in paramilitary activities such as drug dealing and other nefarious activities.
Sir.
The particular recommendation to which the member refers from the Independent Reporting Commission is a matter for the UK and Irish governments, not for the Department of Justice. As far as I am concerned, anyone engaged in criminal activity should cease that activity now and don't need any further assistance to do so. These groups should disband. It's unclear to me what any process of transition or interlocution would achieve. However, how the Irish Government and the British Government proceed with the appointment of any interlocutor is for them to decide. I would agree, however, with the member and would urge caution on any actions taken that could undermine the work of the Executive Programme on Paramilitarism and Organised Crime or lend any legitimacy to those organisations.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Minister, can you please outline what the proposed new organised crime offences will be? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you to my colleague for asking the question. New legislation is intended to demonstrate the importance and commitment of law enforcement to specifically tackle the issue of serious organised crime by ensuring they have additional legislative tools available. It is also intended to send a strong message that there are no individuals who are deemed to be untouchable from their criminality, and ensures that there is scope for sentences to more accurately reflect both the nature and seriousness of the crime, but also the level of their engagement in the commissioning of such criminal activity.
Minister, first of all, can I acknowledge the hard work that your department has done in regards to dealing with paramilitarism, and I fed into that myself, particularly around the language used for paramilitaries. But can I just ask the Minister, has she had any discussions with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland or the NIO in ending the separated prison regime?
It is an issue that is raised with me perennially. I have said before to the member who often raises it, this is a matter for which the solution, I think, will come from outside in and not from inside out. The threat that is posed by those who are granted access to the separated regime by the Secretary of State is, I think, one that is managed now carefully within the prison. Increasingly, those who are held within the separated regime are subject to the same regime as the remaining prisoners, and so in many ways it is somewhat of a narrow distinction between them and the rest of the prison. I have raised it with every Secretary of State, not least of all because of the additional cost burden that we have to carry as a department, and I think if the NIO continue to allocate people to the separated regime, they should also pick up the tab.
Deborah Erskine.
Your question 2.
Sure.
The management of the PSNI estate, including custody suites, is an operational matter for the Chief Constable, who is accountable to the Northern Ireland Policing Board. As I am committed to respecting the operational independence of the Chief Constable and the role of the Board, I would suggest you direct your question to the Chief Constable or the Policing Board directly.
Ms Bunting. Ms Erskine.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The police are part of the Justice Department, And I do not understand why the Minister keeps firing off the PSNI issues off her table to the Chief Constable. There are clear concerns in relation to my constituency with custody suites that are being upgraded and are in close proximity in relation to police and operational matters. And I am pretty sure that those concerns have been raised with the Justice Minister in terms of the timescales and how they are operating, not least, in fact, that it adds cost to our policing service. So what is the Minister doing in relation to having those conversations with the police in relation to this?
The member is unclear as to the tripartite arrangements that pertain to oversight of policing and justice. I'm more than happy to meet with her and explain it, but in the interim I won't be entering into anything that would cut across the responsibilities of the policing board or the responsibilities of the Chief Constable. My duty as Justice Minister is to ensure that both are adequately funded to undertake the role that they have to do. Their job is to decide where they allocate the resources, not mine.
Alan Chambers.
Throughout the police estate, there are around 140 custody cells, including those in reserve custody suites. Can the Minister confirm if any of these cells have been used to house prisoners in the short to medium term due to pressures within the prison service estate?
Minister.
With respect to prisoners being housed on behalf of prison service, it is not the case that we outsource that responsibility. It is one that people are committed to prison either on remand or on a full-time committal basis, and they are housed within prison service estate. There are, of course, pressures within the prisons estate, but I can say that anybody referred to the prison service estate, there is still currently accommodation available for them.
Joanne Bunting.
Mr. Speaker, question 3, please.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I want to answer question 3 and 12 together. I believe both questions have been prompted by erroneous reporting of a recent court case, and so wish to clarify the position. An application for leave to issue a writ of habeas corpus was lodged alleging that an applicant's detention at the instruction of the court in a male prison was unlawful. The application was dismissed by the court with no order as to costs. The judge made no order either in respect of prison service policy or transfer to Highbank Wood Secure College. During the hearing, the judge was advised of the process that was ongoing to confirm the most suitable location for the applicant and was satisfied this process should be allowed to conclude. As per the wishes of previous Ministers of Justice, the Northern Ireland Prison Service had a long-standing, albeit unwritten, position of dealing with transgender prisoners on a case-by-case basis. However, following the deaths of 2 transgender prisoners in English prisons and issues in Scottish prisons, a decision was taken to put in place a formal process. An instruction to governors with guidance on the care and management of transgender prisoners was subsequently issued in August 2022. This followed a review of the current arrangements and was developed after consultation with the Equality Commission and the South Eastern Health and Social Care Trust. When an individual is committed to custody by the courts who identifies as transgender, the prison service will consider their specific needs and risks on a case-by-case basis and take a person-centred and risk-based approach on decisions around accommodation and care, informed by advice from colleagues in the South Eastern Health and Social Care Trust, which is responsible for the delivery of healthcare services to people in prison. It would be dangerous to give a commitment that a male prisoner will never be housed in a female prison and vice versa, as there may be unique risks and issues which lead to such a situation. The risks presented by each case will be assessed on their own merits. To that end, Highbank Wood Secure College and Women's Prison is already a mixed-gender site where the risks of holding males and females in separate accommodation are managed on a daily basis. I am satisfied that the Prison Service remains committed to ensuring that people in prison are held safely and securely at all times and treated with dignity and respect.
Ms Bunting.
I'm grateful to the Minister for that clarification, but this issue of self-identification does have the potential to be a predator's charter. As we've seen from England and Scotland, predators will cynically exploit any loophole, and in all of these circumstances, it's the hard-won rights of women that are depleted and their safety diminished and compromised. In full knowledge of the disturbing statistics around the backgrounds and mental well-being of women in prison, rather than championing the rights of those who want to be women, will the Minister move to protect actual biological adult human females in the prison setting?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm very disappointed at the tone that the member has adopted in regards to this issue. Referring to trans people as adopting a predator's charter is, I think, scurrilous. Many of those who are trans in our system are some of the most vulnerable people in the prison system, and far from being predators, are predated upon. I think it's also important to say that what I champion as Minister of Justice is justice, fairness, equality and dignity. And when it comes to prisons, I champion the safety of every single prisoner, whether that person identify as female, whether they were latent female, whether they were born as a man, whether they identify as a man. It is their safety and not any ideology, whether that be trans ideology or anti-trans ideology, that will drive the protective work we do within the prison system.
Mr Gaston.
Mr Speaker. Minister, at the weekend one of our papers carried a report with the headline "Belfast woman cleared of battering elderly mum in row over table salt." Does the Minister agree with me that that headline was an insult to women who suffer at the hands of violent men with squandering as women?
Mr.
Well, I'm not sure what the member understands by the word squandering, but it doesn't actually seem to match what he's actually talking about. However, it's not my job as Justice Minister to comment on headlines in newspapers. It is my job to ensure that the Justice Department does all in its power to ensure that, irrespective of how anyone identifies, when they come into contact with the justice system, whether they be a defendant, whether they be a victim or a witness, or whether ultimately they be committed to the prison system, their safety is paramount and their dignity is secure.
Sean Mulholland.
Mr Speaker, Minister, this is obviously a very sensitive topic, and I'm just wondering if you could give your assessment of the importance of following an evidence-led and risk-based approach, rather than indulging in some of these knee-jerk populist reactions when you're keeping prisoners safe.
Minister.
I thank the member for acknowledging that this is a sensitive issue, because it's the first time it's been acknowledged in the course of the questioning here. Instead of trying to divide people, instead of trying to other people and further diminish and marginalise people, it is our job in prison service to treat every person who arrives in our care with dignity, with respect, and to ensure their and every other prisoner's safety. Managing risk is what prison service does, and I commend our prison officers for the excellent work that they have undertaken in this regard, not just when it's now in the headlines, but long before it appeared in the headlines and became part of this ludicrous culture war that some people are indulging in today. We ensure that every prisoner, irrespective of how they identify, irrespective of their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their race, their religion, their colour, their creed, that they are treated with dignity, and that any risk that they pose to the remainder of the prison population is properly handled based on a proper risk assessment and an evidence base. That is how this should be done. It is how it is done for every single prisoner, because let's be clear, prisons are, by their very nature, places where dangerous people are held. If we did not do those risk assessments based on the needs and the individual risks posed by prisoners, we would have far more serious incidents within our prisons than we do at the moment, and it's therefore important that we hold to that objective, that we look at each prisoner individually and ensure that they are not posed a risk to by other prisoners, but crucially they are not a risk to other prisoners in how they are housed.
Diana Armstrong.
Question 4, please.
Minister.
Enniskillen Courthouse is currently designated as a hearing centre and is open for 3 days per week, primarily for the delivery of magistrates' court business. In recent years, investments in the building have included internal and external redecoration works and an upgrade to the custody suite ventilation system. The publication of its estate strategy in December 2023 was an important milestone for Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service, as it provides a long-term framework for investment over the next decade and beyond. To implement the strategy, NICS will continue to use data and evidence to baseline the existing estate against the agreed strategic outcomes and to develop prioritised investment in delivery plans in the context of the finite resources available. Future investments in Enniskillen Courthouse will form part of this process.
Ms Armstrong.
Thank you, and I thank the Minister for her response. However, I do need to ask if you accept that any future diminished investment in Enniskillen Courthouse threatens the fabric of the building and access to criminal justice in the future.
I apologise, Mr Speaker, I didn't hear the member's question. I was coughing at the time.
Ms Armstrong.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your earlier response. However, I do need to ask you if you accept that any future diminished investment in Enniskillen Courthouse would threaten the fabric of the building and also access to criminal justice in the future.
Minister.
It's been made with respect to any courthouse that is part of the overall implementation of the estate strategy. There will of course be some difficult decisions that require to be taken with respect to all of the facilities we have. However, any proposal to either reduce or change the operation of courthouses will be subject to public consultation and to the scrutiny of this House.
Mr Speaker, I'd just like to ask the Minister in relation just to the estate. I done a recent visit to the Derry Courthouse and a tour of it. Beautiful building, but the conditions in which staff, the legal profession and local people arriving at that centre are pretty dire, to be honest. So I was wondering, is there any further update on the upgrade to the Derry Courthouse? Thank you.
Well, again, it's part of the overall programme of improvements that we have, and I know that there is ongoing work with respect to the courthouse in Bishop Street. There was at one stage a plan for an entirely new facility for the North West. However, we have been able to obtain potentially additional land, which will allow us to look at instead refurbishing the existing courthouse, so therefore maintaining the fabric of the building that she refers to, but also improving access for people who are coming to the courthouse for the range of facilities and services that are provided within it.
Robbie Butler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 5, please.
Minister.
When staff are being recruited to the Northern Ireland Civil Service, they have the option of indicating on the application form if they have a disability. At any stage following recruitment, staff may also update their HR records to declare a disability. As of January the 1st, 2024, 148 employees in the Department of Justice had declared a disability. That equates to 4.4% of employees in the department.
Mr Butler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for her answer and breaking it down into the percentages. The Minister will be aware that the disabled community make up around 25% of the population of Northern Ireland and that they are woefully underrepresented in all workplaces, not just at our departments and civil service. Are there any actions specifically that the Minister is taking in her own department to increase the opportunities for people with disabilities to work in the Department of Justice?
The Northern Ireland Civil Service, who are responsible for HR for the Department of Justice, operates a guaranteed interview scheme as part of its commitment to the employment of disabled people. Guaranteed interview scheme doesn't guarantee anyone a job. However, its objective is to ensure that applicants who have a disability and who meet the minimum essential eligibility criteria for the role they've applied for are offered an interview. The Department has also offered placements under the International Job Shadow Day, which is an opportunity to celebrate the valuable contribution that disabled people make to our workforce and an opportunity to promote inclusion in the workplace for people with disabilities. Action to increase diversity of the Northern Ireland Civil Service workforce are also being considered in the context of a new 5-year people strategy for next, which is currently under development, with the Department of Finance in the lead. As I indicated in my response, 4.4% of employees with DOJ declared they had a disability. The equivalent figure for the wider Northern Ireland Civil Service is around 6.1%, comparing against the Northern Ireland Economically Active comparator of about 10.2%.
Mr Dixon.
Question number 6, Mr Speaker.
Sir.
As you will be aware, it was not possible to introduce any legislation or progress key policy decisions in the absence of ministers, the Executive and Northern Ireland Assembly during a significant portion of the early part of this mandate. I therefore had to review and reprioritise my previous, more ambitious legislative plans on my return as Minister of Justice at the beginning of last year. My revised legislative programme now includes plans to bring forward 3 Assembly bills in this mandate, equating to 1 per annum, during the time remaining within this significantly shortened mandate. They include a mixed content justice bill, which was introduced to the Assembly on Tuesday the 17th of September 2024, a sentencing bill for planned introduction by autumn 2025, and a victims and witnesses of crime bill planned for introduction by March 2026.
Mr Dixon.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your answer so far. Minister, there's been a great deal of interest expressed to me as a former member of the Justice Committee about the content of the Victims and Witness Bill. Could you perhaps outline for the House what the general principles will be behind that bill and the type of offences which will be covered?
Sure.
Well, there are a range of issues that we're looking at in terms of the Victims and Witnesses Bill, in terms of, first of all, the potential to include some of the recommendations from Judge Marin's report around support for victims of hate crime and special measures within the courts. We're also intending to bring forward additional measures to complete some of the legislative requirements of elements of the Gillen Review, which we had agreed were necessary, and also to put the Victims Commissioner Designate on a statutory footing. There are a number of other issues that we're looking at. It is the third bill in the mandate, and so there is still development of that undergoing in terms of what we intend to include it. But it is important, I think, from my perspective, that those issues in particular are advanced during this particular mandate, and that we have the opportunity to look at, for example, legislation around disclosure regime, protection for complainants and restricting access to third-party material, particularly when it comes to things like counselling records, which is an issue that I know many members are concerned about.
Thank
you. Mr. Speaker, Minister, I commend you for actually introducing legislation in 2024. Many ministers could learn from that. I also appreciate you being in the chamber. Clearly, you're suffering from a cold, so fair play for being here and answering questions. But can I ask you, given the seriousness of the situation we face in relation to hate crime, given what we saw on the streets of Belfast last summer, will you revisit your plans not to introduce standalone hate crime legislation, which was a commitment in your party's manifesto, and seek to introduce a bill in this mandate which properly tackles hate crime? I appreciate you'll say it will be part of another bill, but will you revisit your plans not to introduce standalone hate crime legislation?
I have no intention to revisit those plans. I considered it very carefully before opting on the course of action I did. Had I decided not to decouple the different elements of the hate crime bill from each other and proceed with them as I have at pace, I would not be in a position to make any progress with regard to hate crime in this mandate, because it was to be the fourth bill of the mandate and therefore would have fallen off the end of the time frame. If I were to revisit it now, first of all, I would not have sufficient time for Legislative Council to be able to advance the hate crime bill and the policy development work that would need to take place within my department to happen before the end of the mandate, and so I would effectively be slowing down progress on hate crime rather than speeding it up. I have opted to accelerate it, albeit that means it won't be standalone. But to be clear, it makes no difference whether a bill is standalone or whether the legislative provisions are included in other vehicles. When they're legislation, they're the law.
Seal Guy.
Question number 7, please.
Minister.
My department's additional allocation from the Executive in draft budget 25-26 is £134 million, compared to our stabilisation pressures initially reported of £207 million. In addition, His Majesty's Treasury has earmarked £38 million additional security funding for PSNI. This funding, combined with a reported £5 million reduction of pressures, leaves my department facing over £30 million stabilisation pressures. This excludes an estimated £15 million pressure as a result of the Chancellor's changes to the rules on employer national insurance contributions. My department also submitted capital bids of £146 million and received an allocation of £100 million. Whilst the allocations in 2025-26 are welcome, difficult decisions on prioritisation and service provision will continue to be required to manage the remaining pressures. This will continue to present challenges for legal aid payment times, the ability to grow police numbers and delivery against the draft programme for government.
Ms. Guy.
Can I thank the Minister for her answer, and can I ask you for an update, please, on the PSNI workforce recovery business case?
Minister.
One of the executive priorities under the New Decade New Approach Agreement was to increase police numbers to 7,500. This is the same figure recommended by the Patton report 20 years ago. However, the reality is that police officer numbers are at a record low, and without additional funding it will not be possible for the PSNI to recover and grow as we would wish. So the PSNI has adequate funding to stabilise and recover numbers back to a sustainable position. I have repeatedly raised the need for a better financial settlement for my department with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, as well as with the Finance Minister and other executive colleagues. And I want to pay tribute to the Finance Minister, who I think showed in recent allocations that she has indeed listened to that argument. My officials are currently considering a business case from PSNI on stabilisation and recruitment, and we continue to work closely with PSNI colleagues to help support them to prepare a robust business case for onward submission to the Department of Finance. When that work has been completed, I will be making the case to the Executive for additional funding for this particular purpose. However, in order for the affordability requirements to be met, we will also need to deal with that additional £30 million of pressure that we have in the department. Otherwise, the affordability component of any any business case will not be met, and therefore it is important that as a department we continue to work to reduce that insofar as we can, as well as the PSNI and our other arm's length bodies seeking to do likewise.
Mark Durgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Minister for her answers thus far. Minister, does it remain the case that the Executive is not in line to get one-off Treasury funding of up to £240 million for the unforeseen and unavoidable costs arising from the PSNI data leak, and that this, along with the pressures just outlined by the Minister, mean that the PSNI's ambition, all our ambition to see recruitment of hundreds, even up to 500 PSNI officers in the next financial year is now extremely challenging, if not impossible?
Well, I would agree with the member that it is extremely challenging. I would disagree with him that it is impossible, because I don't believe that it is impossible. I believe it is possible, and I believe if we work together we can achieve it. I think the first and most important part is for us to get the business case together, and that needs to be robust, because remember, there are costs to having too few police officers, as well as cost recruiting more, and we need to consider what those costs are, and that's part of the business case. It is, however, important to recognise, as the member has, that in addition to the immediate pressures that my department is facing, my department also faces exceptional pressures of £227 million in relation to legal claims for McLeod injury to feelings, for the data breach and for holiday pay. These costs are not affordable within my department's budget under any circumstance. The Finance Minister would conclude that they are also not affordable within the executive budget under any circumstance, and therefore I continue to support the Finance Minister's efforts to secure a reserve claim from HM Treasury to fund those particular costs that are out with the normal workings of policing. And finally, on the matter of whether or not we keep pace with the investment of police services elsewhere in GB and indeed in these islands, none of the money that comes to us arrives here hypothecated, with the exception of security funding, which is directly sent from Treasury to the PSNI. And therefore we have to bid, like every other department, into the local processes, the devolved processes here, in order to be able to obtain the resources we need to run our police service, our prison service and all of the other justice elements that we have to cover within budget. We have managed to do that reasonably successfully to date, and I want to thank again the Finance Minister for her work in that regard, but it is an uphill struggle.
Dr. Aiken.
And may I thank the Minister for her comments and answers so far. May I wish her a happy new year. Minister, the cost of the separated prison regime is a quite significant one. Has your department been able to analyse those costs and look at the impact that those costs are, and could she report those costs, please?
My understanding at the last time I looked at this was it was somewhere between £2.5 and £4 million per annum for the separated regime. So in the overall context of my budget, a relatively small amount of money, but nevertheless, as the member says, significant. We have, as I said earlier in response to your colleague's question, raised this on a routine basis with the NIO, who are ultimately responsible for whether or not people are committed into the separated regime. But I would say that we also need to look very carefully at the fact that the prisoners, whether they're in the separated or whether they're in the normal regime, will still have to be housed, will still have to be accommodated, will still have security and other issues pertaining to their costs. And so we should not lose sight of the fact that there will still be a cost to people being in prison, irrespective of how they're housed. But there is an additional cost as a result of separation, and it's something that I raise periodically with the NIO.
I call David Honeyford.
Speaker, question 8.
Rehabilitation is a key priority for the Northern Ireland Prison Service. Individuals committed to its care are offered the opportunity to develop skills and employer-recognised qualifications to give them the best chance of securing gainful employment on release, which evidence shows is a key factor in desisting reoffending. Adopting the further education delivery model, Belfast Metropolitan College and North West Regional College deliver accredited training in all prison establishments, offering entry level 3 to level 3 in education, vocation and employability skills. This includes essential skills training in literacy, numeracy and information computer technology, construction skills such as bricklaying, joinery and tiling, hospitality skills such as barista training, catering and food hygiene, and training in other sectors such as barbering, hair and beauty. Soft skills and interview techniques and CV writing are also offered as part of the range of employability skills programmes. Furthermore, higher education is accessible for prisoners in Northern Ireland through the Open University.
We have to move now to topical questions, and I call Justin McNulty.
Minister, in the 2 weeks from the 20th of December 24 to the 2nd of January 25, police here received 1,288 domestic abuse calls. That's 1,288. 92 calls every day over Christmas, which is significantly higher than the daily average across the rest of the year. Can the Minister outline what work her department has undertaken to establish and address the reasons for the increase in domestic abuse calls every Christmas?
Minister.
It is a well-known factor that periods where people are confined to home, where they don't have access to work, to school, to employment and to other diversions, that sadly the number of reports of domestic incidents, domestic abuse, domestic violence increase. Times where financial pressure is laid upon that, particularly around Christmas, can indeed exacerbate that further. And in a culture where often the celebrations tend towards alcohol, that can further exacerbate any underlying issues within households. So it is not unusual for there to be a spike around domestic incidents when it comes to the Christmas period. However, it is not acceptable, Mr Speaker, that anyone should be in fear at their home at any time of year, be that Christmas, Easter or any other period. And it's important that the PSNI, first of all, have the tools which we have provided through the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act to be able to respond appropriately to those, but also that we have the other support services in place that are able, as part of the domestic and sexual abuse strategy, able to provide the frontline support to people who are affected directly by domestic violence and abuse. It is sad to see that these issues are seasonal, but it's also true to say that if one looks, for example, at large football matches, we know that the police brace themselves for an increase in calls in the aftermath of large sporting events for largely the same reasons. People being at home, having taken alcohol, their team loses, their team wins, and sadly the people who live in their household with them are the people who suffer most.
Mr McNulty.